Welcome, friends. Now this is being recorded, so sorry I had to say that again. This is week 2, lecture 2. For MERN, we're continuing with learning and building components. And today we're going to build a component that you're going to use all of the time. We're really going to dip our toes in today. This isn't now how we're going to really do it in the future, but it is a way that we want to sort of build out exactly what, or sort of build out some of the functionality and the understanding first. And then when we start connecting and using different tools, you'll sort of see how, it all is connected in the long run. But today we're going to be talking about forms. We're going to be talking about basically taking data from a form. We're going to add it into our state, which we learned about yesterday. And then we're also going to just do a few different things. We're going to talk about our event handler. What is prevent default? What does that do? Why do we need to use that? We're going to look at this event listener, this on change, and how we handle that and what that gives us. We're also going to talk about a ternary operator. And then I just talked about Bootstrap in our office hours. So I am going to use Bootstrap. I'll give maybe like a 3-minute walkthrough, but if you want a more in-depth walkthrough, then that will be sort of in our office hour. You're welcome to sort of walk through that. I'll try to talk about it as I go. But it should be fairly simple and it's not super hard to pick up. And as we go, I'll be using this moving forward. And so we will be able to use that and know that sort of moving forward. Before we get started, and I do have, again, a few different things, discussion questions, make sure that those are due on Sunday or they're submitted by Sunday. If you are finding yourself in a space that you're kind of stressed and you're like, oh no, I can either do discussion questions or I can knock out this one core assignment, I would say actually the focus should be your core assignment, not necessarily, or sorry, let me backtrack. Your focus should be discussion questions, not necessarily core assignments. And here's why. I can always, if you have something going on in life, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm very flexible and I can give an extension if necessary. Now, obviously, if that's, abused and taken care of, we'll have a conversation of, hey, why do you think you keep finding yourself in this position? But I personally have some flexibility on core assignments. I can't do anything with discussion questions. I can't reopen them. I can't give them back to you. I can't let you make them up. I don't have the ability to do that. And so please make sure you are doing those. As a reminder, you can miss up to 4 and still pass. If you miss 5, you'll have to retake, even if you've done everything else. So please make sure you're doing those. You have 3 core assignments. This week, we talked about those yesterday. So please make sure you're working on those. Hook forms and then more forms actually build on each other. It goes hook forms and more forms. So as you are building your stuff, it will build upon each other. The last thing I wanted to talk about is I've been getting a lot of stuff and seeing a lot of stuff in Discord. And I know that there's been a little bit of doom and gloom of, oh no, nested repos, what am I going to do? NPX already creates a repository. What do I do? So I wanted to address that. I talked about it a little bit in the office hour. I'll probably talk about it more in depth, but I do want to address this. It is true that npx create react app does create and initialize a repository. Now, if it is creating a React app within a parent folder that already has a .git file, and I'll show you what I mean by here in just a second. If it already has that, then it can recognize it, goes up the chain and says, oh, it already has a repository. I don't need to create a new one. And here's how we know that. Here's what we're going to be, or here's the project, the solution file that is on GitHub. As always, I'll try to put that before class that way you can follow along. Here is just, if I go back, we see that this is our lecture 2 solution. Now, if I go to my actual React file where, npx create react app creates this, if I cd into form react, I can do ls and I see these different aspects, right? I see my node modules, my package.lock.json, my package.json, all that stuff. We're familiar with that. If I also say ls-al, these are my hidden files. And you can see that we do not have a .git folder here. We do not have a .git folder here. That is the folder that npx create react app creates that initializes that repository. And the reason we don't is because if I come here to my parent, which this is what is on GitHub, this is what I keep adding to. If I say ls-al, here we see that we have this Git folder that is created. So because I already initialized this, and this was my first thing I initialized, whenever I run npx create React app, it witnesses this and says, oh, I'm good. I don't need to create a nested repository. So for those that have been stressed about npx create React app already doing that, it is smart and sees this, so it doesn't have to. The spot that you could get in trouble is if I'm cding into week 2, and then I've got lecture 2 solution. If I'm in here and here's my assignment, and I say this git init, and I run this, that is me trying to initialize a new repository within my parent repository. That is where you can have an issue. So if you're going to have one folder and you want to have a React folder on GitHub, that's okay. You can do that. Just every time you're wanting to add, make sure that you are not doing this git init within this new project. Always go back to the parent that has this .git file, and that is what you're going to run your .git or your git add space dot, your git commit, and your git push file. That is that will show you. That's what we're doing. That's what I do. That's why on GitHub you can see sort of all the files, and I haven't had an issue because I just make sure that I go to the parent. I know that it's Feb 23 MERN, and then that's where I'm doing my initializing or my adding, my committing, and my pushing from my repo. So just as if you guys are stressed about npx, it's smart. It knows as long as its parent already has this .git file, it will not create it. So there is nothing to stress about there. Any questions on that before I keep going? Put a 1 in the chat if that makes sense. Just make sure you don't say git init. Always travel back and then do your git add. Perfect. Okay. Great. Any questions before I get started with our lecture? Good. Okay. So we'll go ahead and get started. This is what we're creating today. It looks very simple, but we're just going to create a form. This form's going to have some validations of, first name must be at least 3 characters. A last name must be at least 3 characters. An age must be, I think, at least 12. And then an email is just going to be your normal email. So that's what we're going to create. And we're going to have we're going to see how we can sort of manage our state, manage understanding sort of what is happening from the background. Again, it's going to be a little bit different than how we're going to do it when we attach a database. But now we're going to start seeing the pieces and how sort of the beginning, we're walking before we're running of, okay, what exactly is happening in the long run. Cool. So this is my class. I'm going to move this over here. Perfect. Cool. So now what I need to do is I am in our class assignment. I need to create my React folder. So what I'm going to do is come back here. Now that we've seen how it's going to work, I don't need that anymore. And then I'm going to say cd to lecture 1, 2 in class. Cool. Here I'm going to say npm npx create React app, and I'm going to say form React. Perfect. So now I'm going to create my React app, and we are going to jump in and get started. We should see it on our left. It's already started, but we got to finish as it's downloading, and then we'll be rocking and rolling. While we're waiting, how are people feeling about assignments? Are you stuck on anything? Are there any assignments that have been kind of making you guys a little bit stressed or kind of challenging? All right. Okay, quiet. You guys are quiet today. That's all right. Cool. So what we're going to do is, if you see here, we have some, if I click on this, we have this nice blue outline over. You can see how these are rounded. If I have a number, it's got these really nice hovering pieces. And then I have a button here. Now, when I am using this, or the way I use this is I use something called Bootstrap. The way I created this, sorry, not used. The way I created this is something called Bootstrap. And we talk again in depth about this in our office hours. So if you're not familiar with Bootstrap, make sure you go and watch the office hour. But just from a very high level, Bootstrap is something that it is a list. Basically, it is a whole bunch of classes from a CSS perspective that we can have access to, we can put into our project. And then anytime we call the class name, we're able to utilize those classes and that styling per se. So there's a whole, Bootstrap has a lot of great documentation to where if you want to do, learn more about Bootstrap, we talked about containers and grids in our office hour. If you wanted to do, some sort of different things, you can hear we have forms. We have some validations that we can also do. We're not going to do those validations in Bootstrap. We're going to do some logic, but you can do that. So you can see there's a ton of different things with Bootstrap and with all the different components, utilities, different things we can do. The way that we do this and the way that we add Bootstrap is there's a few ways, and there's a few different pieces of Bootstrap. There's the CSS aspect, so the styling. And then there's also the JavaScript access, so some of the functionality. We're not going to touch that. We're just going to deal with styling. That's really all. And it's just a nice way to make things look nice with very, very, very little effort, which is what I love. So we can download this, like Gray said in the office hour. If you download this and install this into this assignment, then you can actually change stuff. You can go in and see what is happening. But what we're going to do is, I don't care to do that. I just want to use the CDN. The CDN. And what the CDN is just basically a link that allows us to call upon the function or the functionality and the documentation of Bootstrap to actually utilize our tools. So if I come here, I have this CDN. The place we're going to locate this is I'm going to go to my public. And then remember, everything is really rendered on this HTML through this div root, right? Remembering that in our source, if we go to this index.js, this is our app. Our app is being rendered in this root element. So everything is really rendered on this one singular HTML file. Knowing that, what I can actually do is come in here and anywhere between the head of this file, I can add in this CDN. Now, if I say Option Z or Alt Z, or Alt Z or Option Z, if you're on Mac, Alt Z if you're on Windows, then what that'll do is it'll truncate it to where it puts it on 2 lines within my screen instead of being super duper long. But now, because I've done this and I saved it, anytime I call a class name, I have access to Bootstrap, which is really nice. So I don't have to do anything different. I just now have to target the class that I want. Cool. Any questions on that? Questions on Bootstrap on getting that?
Does it matter where in that file you place that?
As long as it's in the head, as long as it's between the head. If you're doing the JavaScript version, you put it in the body, like the script goes in the body. But for the CSS, it's just like if you were to link a CSS file, you put that in the head. So that's where that would go. Great question. Yep. So, but if it was like on line 18 or line, 12, no, it doesn't matter as long as it's just within the head. Cool. Okay, so let's go ahead and try to recreate what we have. Okay, so I have my app. I just deleted everything. Now I want to create this form that I want to maybe be able to reuse. What is my next step? What am I going to do here? Do I want to create my form in here, or what would be a better way to recreate or be able to have a form that I can put in different places? Yeah, exactly. I want to create a form component. So first I need to make my components folder. So I'm going to come into my source, create this components. Perfect. And in that, I want to create my form.jsx. Cool. So now here I'm in my form. Can anybody remind me what the quick shortcut, the emit, RAFCE, find out what it means to me? Exactly. Perfect. We have this form. We are able to utilize this form. Perfect. Now I am good to go, right? Let's actually create our form. So here, let's try, I'm going to test something. If I say form dot, let's see if JSX, yes, it will do it. Oh, I love this. So image abbreviations is amazing. If I have an element that I want to add a class to. So here we have form. Remember, form is an HTML element. If I want to add a class to it, I just have to put a dot and then I can put my class name. So I'm going to say form. And this is from Bootstrap. Form is a class to kind of make it look a certain way. Then I'm going to, if I want to add a second class, I'm going to say dot call medium 4. And then my third class, I'm going to say MX auto. And this MX auto says I want it in the center. And you can see that once I do that, it creates this class name. Remember that on Bootstrap, some of the documentation you might see if you're just using the normal CSS as class, but in JSX, we have to say class name. And then it gives me these different classes. Cool. Great. So now I want to, what makes up a form? What are really the two elements that make up a form? Yeah, exactly. A label and an input, right? And so there's a couple things I can do from a Bootstrap perspective. I can create a form group that I can have a label. Now a label is going to be, and this form group is just a CS or a Bootstrap piece. So if you don't add these classes, if you don't want to use Bootstrap, that's okay. You just won't have these classes and they'll just look different, right? That's really all it is just for looks. So I'm gonna create this label and it's going to be called a form label. Perfect. And then this is going to be our first. Okay. And then I'm going to have a input. And by default, our input is of type text, but we'll see how we would change that if we want to do this shortcut typing. But because it's default type text, I can just put a dot and I'm going to say form control. Perfect. So let's actually get this up and running and see exactly what we're looking at. Here we're in class. I'm going to cd to form react npm start. Okay, I'm not seeing anything. What did I forget? Somebody said close the div. My div's closed. My form looks good. Oh yeah, also I do need this div. But that's not the thing. Yes, great. Yeah, exactly, Jordan. It's not in my app. Right? I created this. Good catch there, Jackie, for this div. I created this, right? But I didn't put it in my app. So what I want to do is do form. If I say this, form, perfect. So now I import my form. And then I bring it in. Sometimes when you look at a word, like form looks like it's spelled incorrectly. And if it is, please let me know. But sometimes we look at a word so much, cool. So now I'm running. We're still good to go. Okay, perfect. Now I am seeing these values here. Now all I had to do was bring it into my app. So I can do a couple things with this. I'm actually going to build in an H1 that says, please fill out this form. Perfect. And then let's actually create a couple of these. Now, if I want to do something very quickly, I can do Alt Shift or Option. If you're on Mac, it's Option Shift and then Alt Shift if you're on Windows and just the down arrow key, and it will actually double up and create sort of the same thing. For this one, I just wanted to say last name. Cool. So now if I'm looking at this, we're crushing it. Now there is a Bootstrap class called margin top or margin bottom. I'll show you sort of one and the other. That allows you to see how this isn't spaced out well. All you do here is we have this form group, and I'm just going to say margin top 3. And what that's going to do is it's going to give me a little bit of space in between these guys right here. I could do the same thing. Maybe I'll just do that for this guy as well. Margin top 3. So now we got a little bit of space. Okay, our form is looking awesome. Great. Now I want to, if I just have a div, Copilot is already doing it for me, but I could just say dot form group. If you just say dot form group and you don't put the element there, then it'll just do a div. You can see by default, that is what div will be. So I want it as margin top 3. Perfect. And it'll create my div for me. Now I need a label. Label. Oops. Oh my goodness. Label dot. And then we're using form label. And then here we are going to have age. So this will be my age. Oops. Perfect. And then now we talked about how input, if by default it's type text. So if I say input dot class name, that'll be a dot, it'll be a type text of class name. But here age, I don't want it to be text. I want it to be a number, right? And so you can see already all these Emmet abbreviations. There's a ton of different ones. But we can see if I want it to be a type, a specific type, I actually can just put colon and say number dot form label. And that'll create, that's just this little shortcut for that. Oh, I guess I can put also bootstraps. Here you go. Sorry about that. Here's the CDN as well. If you wanted to add that in too, yeah, it's now in the chat. Somebody asked if I could quickly show how Bootstrap is imported. Yep. All we have to do is I added in the CDN for which is just a link basically to that. And you just go to this public folder, this index, and then just put it anywhere in between this head. I put mine on line 18. You just put it right there. And then now we have access to Bootstrap. Am I going a little bit too quick? Can you just put a 1 in the chat or put like a 1 if I'm okay, or 0 if I need to slow down a little bit. And that's okay. If I'm okay to slow down, I know we're kind of cruising. Cool. Okay. So because I did that, I'm showing you a little bit of tricks here to make it much easier to code this. So now we have this type number. We still have our form labels. If we look at our handy dandy guy, input type, no, form label. Oh, it's form control. Sorry. I put form label on our inputs. That was the issue that we were getting there. Now it looks nice. And you can see that we have this nice little number thing right here. And then last one I want to do is I'm going to create this guy. And now I'm going to do our label dot form label. And this one's going to be for an email. Perfect. Now I can do a type text as well, or you can see there also is a type email. So I'm just going to do that, because what this will do is give us a little bit of sort of validations and make sure that my form won't be submitted if it doesn't follow at least, a letter at symbol, a letter dot, or a number dot com or org or something. So at least follows a little bit of a structure. You would never rely on this, but it is a quick and easy tool to that'll help you some sort of validations, and I'll show you that in here in a second. Cool. So I've created my form. It looks great. It's in the middle. We have some good space in between these different pieces. What is something I need also if I have this form and I want to deal with some data, or I want to give my data somewhere, because forms are going to be the main way that we exchange data, right? Or send data, or collect data. What do I need? What am I missing here? Yeah, submit button. You guys are crushing it. So from anybody from the office hour, what can I do for this button here? You guys remember? Does anybody remember from office hour? So I'm gonna have a button. That's a fact, right? Yeah, somebody already put in there. BTN is a button type, and we'll sort of see what that looks like. So submit. Now, if I come here, we see this submit, and it's kind of, if you look around it, if I click on it, you see it's got this nice little button, like it has the rounded edges and it's a good size, but it's white. So that's kind of confusing. Yeah, Chris, you've got it. We can actually change the color as well and say BTN primary. There's a whole bunch of different colors, and we go through this in the office hours. So if you guys are confused, we walk through all of this. There's a whole bunch of different colors. Primary is going to give us a nice blue. And so we've got a blue, but it's kind of close. What can I add on this button to make it kind of push away? Yeah, exactly. MT3. Great job, Kelsey. Great job, Chris. So MT-3, so margin top. I could have also done it here. I could have added the class of margin bottom. So I could have said MB3, and that would do the same thing because it's now adding margin to the bottom of this div. So pushing my button down. Either one would work. Perfect. So now I've got a great little form here. Cool. And there's a couple things I want to do with this. We want to make sure that, again, we're not really going to, well, what I'm about to teach, we're not going to do fully, but it's just sort of the first step. Somebody asked in chat if you just put M, does that margin? I don't believe so. I think it's just margin top or margin bottom, but that'd be a great thing in the docs to look up. But let's say I wanted to keep this data that my user is giving, because right now, if I just say will cal 30, and then I say w@c.com and I submit it, cool, that's happening. It's being submitted, but nothing is happening with it, right? The data leaves, you're not keeping track of that data, and data is really, 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 really useful, right? And so now what we can do is we can actually handle and keep this data, and we want to keep and have access to this data. So based off what we learned yesterday, what is a way that if I want to keep data persistent or I want to have access to it, what is something I can use? Anybody know? Yeah, we can use useState, right? So what I can do is I can import useState. Perfect, from React. And then now what I can do is actually keep track of this information in here. There's a couple things we're going to have to do with it. One note, I was driving myself crazy today in coding, is remembering that your useState goes within your function. If you I accidentally did it outside my function and I could not understand for the life of me what was happening. So if you're ever getting that error for like useState is a higher level, make sure that it's within your function, not outside of this. If you put it up here, then it's going to be an issue. Cool. So if I'm wanting to have some state for this, you can see that we've got, remembering that we would say const, so we're creating our state. We're wanting access to our state. And then we have our first name, and then we have set first name. Remembering that this, if we were importing data from our app, right, this would be the key that we're having. And then this function of set first name allows us to reset this first name value. Can anybody remember what this first name is? Like, what are the names of these two things? Anybody remember? Yeah. Yeah, these are our getters and our setters. So this guy right here, this first name is our getter. This set makes sense, our setter. And then we're calling this useState. Now we're not bringing anything in per se. So for right now, we'll just leave this as this quotation. That's very okay. Now I want to do this for all of them. So I'm going to have useState for all of these guys right here. And we're not doing anything with it yet, but this is a way that we're going to take our data and be able to hold this for a second and be able to do something with it. Cool. I'm going to pause right there. Are there any questions, any sort of confusion of what we're doing for right now?
Yeah, Kala had a question. I'm not sure if Will answered it, but Kala, if you want to share your answer, share your question now, because your hand was raised for a little bit.
Yeah, I was just wondering, so like in the form, all of those form group divs, would you make like one component for that instead of making 4 divs that's pretty much the same, and then just use props to change like the type and the label name and all that stuff?
I mean, you could. Sometimes you can get really modular, right? And so sometimes there is a thing of getting too modular with that. But yeah, in theory, you
Would you do that like in a real world scenario? Is that too much?
I wouldn't. Yeah, I wouldn't do that because yeah, I would say that that's a little bit too modular with that.
Okay.
Yeah, great question though. Yeah, I wouldn't. I don't. I would do something like
Yeah, in
this.
a real life application, they will just have it here. Because sometimes they may use like a framework or a library or something, not framework, a library to like have validations and to have certain stylings from using Sassy. It'll be a lot. They wouldn't do something like that there. But good question. I didn't
Yeah.
think about that.
Yeah, because then also you're changing this. And so you'd have, that's one of those when we're getting too modular, right? And we're trying to break it out because I fully understand that component thing. And there is an argument right now with component because there's sort of the monolithic and then the component based or functional based as well. That sometimes you can get too modular and it's too broken down to where it doesn't necessarily make sense. There might be a use case where that happens. So I won't say no, right? I won't say that that never is the case. But I would say that for right now, no, in this example, I wouldn't break that down. You would have like a login, like this would be a great example of maybe like you would have a login with some sort of functionality, like a login component, maybe a registration component that you would then just inject into, let's say you had like a dashboard page, right? Those two components you would inject into, but you wouldn't break down the name, the first name, email, last word. You would keep those together. Somebody asked, should we use const label names equals props instead of rows 6 through 9? Great question, Jennifer. If we were going to take in data from our app, we're not going to do that today, but if we were going to take in data from our app, then yes, we would bring in props. And then in our use state, we would probably destructure and then we would throw that in. We're not doing that. Remember that props is when we're passing data down. We're not going to do that for today's lesson, but yeah, I love the way you're thinking. That is something we would do if we were getting data from our app and wanting to pass it to this component. We would absolutely do that. So great job. Cool. Any other quick questions? Cool. Now we see that whenever I am adding something in here, right, this is changing, or we want to have access to whatever data is within there, right? And if we are looking at sort of JavaScript and understanding, there's a lot of different things on the login platform or the learn platform for these event handlers. There's a great one called onChange. What will allow us to update our state if somebody is typing. We can update our state and keep and have access to what they are doing. So what we can do in this regard is here, when we have our input, right, where we have our input, we can say on change. And this on change is going to be where we put our function, right? Let's see. Yeah, it's where we put our function. So I was going to see if it gave us a definition. Now, knowing that we love these arrow functions because of what we talked about the other day, that these anonymous functions don't run automatically with React. They have to be, called. Then we are going to do this anonymous function. But what we want to do is we want to use this when they change or when they add in some values. We want to make this value. We want to set it to this value right here, right? We want to use our setter and say, okay, they gave me a name. Let's set this getter or first name to that value. Before we get to that, one thing I want to show is what we can actually do. So if we have this, I'm going to say console.log. When we're dealing with onChange, this is our event handler. When we have this, what actually happens in the background is we get this event object. And we'll see what this means here in a second. When this onChange happens, we get this event object. So we're actually going to pass that object into our anonymous function because we want to be able to have access to what the user is doing. I can call this event. Oftentimes you'll just see it called E. So what we're going to do is we're going to console log E and actually see what we get with that. So here, if I come to this guy, I'm going to use my inspect tools. And here I'm going to come to my components. Now, remember, you have to download we talked about this day one, sort of downloading these tools, but I'll be able to see my components. But first and foremost, we will be able to see our event. So if I change this, you can see just based off of one change, I added, multiple letters. So I added 4 letters, meaning I changed the value within my input every time. And that input caused an event, our synthetic based event, and it gave us this value. So it's this entire event object that we get access to a ton of different things, right? A ton of different things within this. We can look at different pieces of this to understand exactly what we are doing, right? Exactly what we have access to. Also, we can see what our user changed or what the value is of this event based on this target key right here. So our user comes and they add in their name. Well, on our event, this is our most recent, right? We've got this target, and this target has a couple different pieces as well. But really the one we care about is this value, which is this DFHG. So when our user inputs or changes, we get an event every single time. But when they submit it or when they are done, we would have the most up-to-date value here. That way we could set our state to that value. I'm going to pause there. Does that make sense, or would you like me to redo that? I feel like that might have been a little confusing. When we have these event handlers, anytime an event happens, this isn't on click, when we have these values, it creates this event object. Within this event object, we have a ton of different key value pairs, but the one we care about right now is this target. Because target gives us a key value pair of value, where value is the key, and that is the actual value put into this element right here. So the exact value put into this element right here. Just put a 1 in the chat if that makes sense, or put So somebody asked a great question. Is this showing us use state code is working, or we see this because of on change? Wonderful question, Jennifer. We don't have anything to do with our use state yet. This is just showing that the on change created an event object because an event happened. These are event listeners. And we wanted to just do that. So if I were to say .target, because, right, I'm doing that key, I can do that. And now if I were to refresh, and I say H. Here, now, this is just that event target. So we're saying this is what changed. This is the exact value that changed. This is the exact element that changed. If I want to see the value it changed by, I just say dot value. So now if I come here and I refresh, and I say H, we get H. So it's a way that we can keep track. Now, again, it's kind of hard. I think I'm maybe struggling to explain it fully, because we're going to take this data and put it in use state, but that's not necessarily how we're going to do it when we incorporate a database. But I'm just trying to show you how an event object is created, and we can go into that event object, grab the information, and we'll be able to do something with it. In the future, we will be able to now take this and add it to a database. Somebody asked, is use state like session? A little bit, but not. I think Gray answered, yeah, not necessarily. But yeah, it's a little bit. It's very similar to session, but it's a way that we can just keep hold of data. Okay. Well, now knowing that we have this event that we can access and target, and me saying, okay, I want, when this form is complete, I want to use this function, my setter function, to set my first name to whatever value they put in. Instead of console logging, I can just say set first name. So now if I were to pull this up and then I go here, no longer console logging, but here, remember, or here in my components, you can see the state that we have. Because I've now updated my state, it updates and knows, okay, every time I change, it updates this, and now my state is here. So I am setting my state to whatever is being typed. Now, again, that doesn't necessarily make sense now, but when we submit it, we're going to want the end product, right? Yes, it is redoing state over and over and over again, and that's okay. In my mind, when I was first learning this, I would think, well, why wouldn't we just want to get the state once that's in, like once that's done? But this is a way that this is how sort of React operates, and this is normal, right? This is a normal way to handle state. So if I say will, when they press submit, I will have access to will, right? This event listener allows me to change this over and over and over again. Somebody asked how I can see this. In the first class, we talked about the React components add-on that you can download. Gray, I don't know if you can get that link for me. That'd be awesome. And put that in the chat. So you won't be able to see this if you don't have that downloaded. I'm in Google Chrome. So that's how I can see this state here. So all I'm going to do is I'm actually going to apply this same logic to all of my different values. So instead of first name, I'm going to say last name. Instead of set name, I'm going to say age. And for the last one, I'm going to say set email. Perfect. So now if I were to change this, now I'm going to say 30 and w@c.com, we can see that now my state is being updated and I now have access to those values. I now have access to those values. Are there any questions on event handlers or on this event handler, on this event object, how we got into the event object? Using dot notation, we say there's this object, go into this key, and retrieve its value. And as we saw, that key is, this value key is what gives us the value of what is typed. Guys, put a 1 in the chat if this is making sense, but a 0 if it does not. Perfect. Okay. So now I have access to this. That's cool. But if I submit, cool, that's it. Nothing happens, right? And that's okay right now for what we're doing, because what this is doing is refreshing, but I don't have access to this. What we'll do moving forward is in a couple of weeks, we're going to use this tool called Axios to actually connect to a database and actually update some information. But for right now, there's one more thing I want to talk about is, yes, we are updating our state, but also when we are dealing with a form, we also need to have a, basically we need to be able to handle and call when something is submitted, what do we want to do? Right now, we're just updating state, we submit, we press that submit button and it refreshes because it sort of refreshes the screen and we lose that data. That's not always what we want to do, right? We want to be able to have that information and be able to show that information there. So what we can do is create an event handler to handle what do we want to do when we submit, when we have this value. So what I will do is I don't need to do it on my button. I actually will do it in my form here. And I'm just going to use the on submit. This on submit event handler is basically, it knows that once this button is pressed, a submission is happening, right? We are submitting the values of this form, and then we can do whatever we want to do. In the future, again, we're going to have a function that takes that data that we've had from our state, right? Because our state's being updated. We're going to take that data. We will add it into a database, or we'll update a database, or we'll delete, we'll do whatever we need to do. And then we'll be good to go. And then we can refresh and go to the next page, or redirect if we need. Right now, I just want to create our submit handler. And so here we'll call it handle submit, where what we're going to do is we're going to take in our event. Again, we take in our event that is happening. And there's something that is really important called prevent default. And I'll show you sort of what that means here in a second. So right now, if I don't have this, and I say handle submit, I come here and I say will cal 30 page. Oh, oops. w@c.com. We get this, but you can see that it refreshes our page and we lose our information. Refreshes our page and we lose our information. What this does is this says, when you do that, I don't want to lose. Data is valuable. Data is key, right? If one person, if you ever talk to a marketing person or a data person dealing with forms, it is so challenging to get somebody to fill out a form. Think about, from an easy perspective, how many surveys do we send to you guys, right? Way too many. I already know. I'm so sorry about that. But there's this idea of, okay, if we mess up and we ask you to fill out again, the odds of you filling out a form a second time are very, 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 very low. So we want to make sure if we have this data, if somebody's willing to fill out a form, they're willing to fill out this information and give us their information, we want to be able to keep that. So this prevent default, what it will do is actually prevent this from refreshing. So I'm going to say will cal 30 w@c.com. And I submit. Now, nothing looks like it's happening. I am submitting, and again, it's a little more theory, because in the long run, it's not going to stay on the screen and have this information. Like we'll redirect somewhere, or not redirect, but we'll have a new component show up our dashboard. But this is, if we look here, if we go to our console log, we are getting this information, right? We get to keep this information. We get to have it. If I were to not have this, once this hits this function, we lose it. We lose all that information. So when we're handling our submits, we want to make sure we always do prevent default. And that allows us to have access and keep our data. Oops. So now when I'm console logging Will Calhoun, we still have that information. We're not refreshing and losing out on the information. We'll be able to do something with it when it's submitted. Because by default, what React wants to do is once that's submitted, it says, okay, let's bring in the next thing. Let's come back to this form. We're saying, no, we want to prevent that for right now. That might happen. We'll do that eventually. But I need to do something with the data that was given. Again, we're going to use Axios. We're going to connect to MongoDB and we're going to communicate with our database. But for right now, all we're going to do is just console log. So this prevent default lets us have access to that data after it is submitted. And we are preventing a refresh. Now, again, we'll get to a point, because this isn't a great use case, that we can clear this information, but we're just not there yet. Any question on this? Any questions at all? Okay, how are we feeling? We have 10 minutes left. I can go over ternary operators, which might put me about 5 minutes over, or I can save that for tomorrow. What would you guys prefer? Can you guys put a 1 if you want me to go over it now, or 0 if you want me to, if your brain's sort of dead, and I can spend the next 10 minutes walking through this and answering any questions. 0 if you want me to just do ternary operator tomorrow. Need coffee. Okay. Unfortunately, we're hammered by zeros. So tomorrow what we'll do is we'll add on a validation. For those of you that are curious, all we're going to do is add in a ternary operator. This will be a very quick thing that we'll add into. This is a very easy validation that we're going to do just on our end. But I'll walk through the ternary operator and we can see how that works and how that operates tomorrow. So, okay, so we're not doing that. We've got 10 minutes left. This was a lot. Would you guys like me to walk through it just step by step really quickly one more time? Or you need to go play with it, get your feet wet. It is also a brand new thing. So, okay. So a couple of people asked me to, somebody asked if they could put their link down on Discord. Yeah, that's fine. In the industry is what we are doing, creating validations. Yeah, validations is going to be something you always have, right? You think about like a password and it says like, oh, this must be 10 characters long and have a special character or whatever. That's a validation. This is not a great validation. I was just going to show you a really quick ternary operator validation that we can have, but it's not, you would have other validations like actually in industry. Somebody asked if they can do a quick plug Discord. Sure, go ahead. Oh, Katie made a thread on Discord. A bunch of people have already posted their profiles, but you guys can keep it going. And then, yeah, it's a great way to connect. Guys, I can promise you, if you want to get a job, know people, that is the biggest thing. Because somebody in here will get hired and then their company will hire you or be hiring again and they can give a referral. And that's the easiest way to get in a company. So yes, get to know everybody, become friends. It is really helpful because we're all in this together. Okay. Somebody said, where's the info stored or passed, I guess, into another component? Right now, Jordan, we're not doing that. We're not sort of storing or passing the information in. Right now, all we're doing is we're taking the information that our user adds. We're targeting our event value, which is what the user is adding. And then we're using our setter functions to set our state for our getter values. So first name, last name, age, and email. That's all we're doing currently. Again, we will have within this function, we'll keep event prevent default. We'll keep that. But then we're going to use Axios and we're going to connect to a database and we're going to be able to add in that information in other places. So for right now, we are just, and again, I told you sort of at the beginning, it's a little wonky. This isn't normally how we're going to do it, but I just wanted to show you really the event object, how we can take the event object that the user adds in, that value, use our setter to put it in state. That's a common thing we'll do. So you might need to do, there might be multiple functions that we can call within this that handles that. So having access to our data is really important because we might need to manipulate it in some way. But yeah, that's what we're showing. Somebody asked, are we using MySQL? Nope, we're going to use MongoDB. It's a not only SQL, so no SQL. It stands for not only SQL, no SQL database.
I saw Chris, your hand was up.
Yeah, quick question. In the platform, there was a section where for the on change, instead of writing that function there, they did like a const like first name or handle first or whatever outside of the return. And then they did all that logic inside of that const, including like validation stuff. And then they would just call that on the on change.
Sure.
Why don't we do that here? Or is there a reason we should choose one or the other?
Let me pull that up and see exactly. Do you have the exact section?
Let me go back to the Learn platform. I just noticed it because in one of my assignments I did it that way and I had like it was just a lot of what seems to be now unnecessary code. But
oh, this guy right here. Is that what you're looking at? This const new user?
No, well, I'll find it here in a second before we run out of class.
Yeah, this feels a little redundant because in theory you could actually just create this on the outside. right? And set it to state. You could just create this outside of this function and then pull that in there. So this feels a little weird. Unless it's this guy that you're looking at. Again, the whole point, there's going to be different ways that we're going to improve on this. The whole point was that we can understand event objects and that we can target the values within our event object.
Sorry, I'm trying to find exactly
No,
what
you're
I was
totally fine.
talking
You're
about.
totally fine. Trying to see where you would be at. Yeah, when you find it, let me know. But
I will, I'm sorry.
no, you're totally fine. No. So conditional rendering. Somebody said conditional rendering. Let's see. Yeah.
Okay, so I did it in my more forms assignment. So it has to be somewhere right above more forms.
What is it? The conditional rendering that's currently on my screen.
No, I'll find it.
Okay. Yeah, we can
You gotta scroll down. I believe it's
keep
down at
going.
the bottom, or maybe right there.
Oh, this guy.
Yeah, so it was something like that where they did like a handle title and then they would just plug in handle title in the return on the on change. But yeah, so they taught that
Mhm.
in the platform for a section with like the validations and all that.
Yeah, and that's actually where we're going to be heading. Because when we start
Oh.
dealing with validations, yeah, we'll have that to where we can run that and have this information. The validation I was going to show was just a very basic introduction to ternary operators and why we would have validations. But yeah, this is where we're going to be heading. For sure.
Okay.
Because this allows us a little bit more functionality to where we can say, right, like right now, even if I had a ternary operator, like if I were to bring up this code right here, what this does is this basically gives a warning, but it doesn't prevent us from doing anything, right? I can still submit it even with this warning. And so what this would do, go back to the code, and I'll go over validations tomorrow. But what this will actually do is it will call this handle title that we will have to, then when it's changed, it'll go through and it allows us to prevent, or allows us the ability to prevent bad data from entering our database. So let's say that a user has to have an email, right? But they don't put anything in there. Think about a normal validation. What this does, instead, if they press submit, well, we don't want to submit bad data to our database and corrupt it. There are other things that you can do from a database perspective in ways that like, it's a little bit antiquated, but there's always ways that people can try to just ruin your stuff. Like there's, if you have a, like a MySQL database or a tabular database, people can put in like name, they could say, oh, let me go back here. Like, let's say that this was a tabular, they could be like drop user table. And so what this actually happens, and this is why validations are important, is because if somebody were to put this in a tabular database, what it does, if you don't have it, yeah, Jordan, it's called SQL injection. If you don't have it set up in the back end, if you took Python, you were able to do this, you were set it up in your queries. But if you were just to inject this into your query, this would actually just, if you had a table called user or users, this would actually run that query and then basically kill your, it would drop your table. And that's happened to people, right? It's called SQL injection. And so what validations do is we can add in different preventative natures. We can add in different aspects, but then also really not everybody's trying to just ruin our lives. It does allow us to make sure that it's 3 characters long, or that a table, if there is nothing, if the length is less than 1, then we say, hey, you didn't add anything. Let's say they added 2 letters and we say, okay, well, you added something, but it's not long enough. Then once it finally gets to a good value, like, or actually actually gets to a point where, okay, this has passed our test, then we can add it into our database. So that's the whole idea about validations. So yeah, this is sort of where we're going to.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Any other questions? Sorry, I see that some hands are raised. I don't even know where the person, or when hands are raised, I'm sorry, I'm not seeing you. I literally don't even know where my participants are. Like, I don't know why that's not showing up. So any other questions? Somebody asked, is there validations added later that import such as like regex? So we can add in regex. I might do that as like a week 7, week 8 thing. For regex, or maybe we'll do regex. Maybe I'll do it sort of for an email. So that way, if you guys don't know what regex is a way that we can say, we'll say email. Basically, it has to follow a certain pattern. And so regex is a very popular thing to say, okay, if we want this to have the pattern where it has to have something, an @ sign, something else, a dot, and then something else, we could do this pattern and say, if it doesn't follow this, then it doesn't work, right? We won't accept, it has to have a character set, right? And here means a whole bunch of different things. And then it has to have an @ symbol, has to have another character set that will allow, has to have a dot, and then another character set between two. Yeah. So then if it doesn't do that, if it doesn't follow this expression, then we have an issue here. And so these brackets allow for different things for us to have like words or characters. So it has to have that. It can only be those guys. But you can't do, 2 @ signs or something like that. That's what regex is, just a pattern validation. So I'll add that into our email. Whenever we do emails, I'll do that. Any other questions, friends?
Just a reminder that I'll be going over events and event handling, so anything that more in depth during office hour. So some stuff will be repeated for those folks who like wanted to go over the whole form submission and everything. So we'll be talking about that, including like e-target value and so on and so forth. So if that was part of your question, that we covered more in depth. So we did not forget about you, just letting you know. But that's a reminder, not that.
Cool. Well, other than that, unless there's any other questions, I'll stop the recording here.